What is up, you guys? Welcome to episode 45. I'm Jennie O'Connor, and I help multi-passionate creatives slay imposter syndrome so they can grow their influence and self-promote with grace. Let me ask you a question. Are you working a job that brings you no satisfaction while you look over your shoulder at all the things you wish you could be doing that truly light you up? Do you dream of somehow combining all your loves into a venture that makes you money? I've created the Multipassionate Master Plan to help you do just that. So if you're committed to making 2022 the year you stop working at a job you hate and finally find the career love of your life, head on over to jennyo'connor.com/master plan to jump on the wait list. This step is important, you guys, because folks on the wait list will get exclusive access to the course and 6 weeks of live coaching for more than 40% off. So if you miss out on being notified when I open the doors, you'll miss out on getting all of the value I so lovingly packed into the Multi-Passionate Master Plan for a literal steal. Go jump on the list today. I am talking today with Steve McCready, a listener of the show who randomly also happens to be in one of my coaching programs. So when we connected with each other, we were both like, wait, don't I know you? Building on his past experience as a psychotherapist and his extensive study of personal growth, emotions, and the human mind, Steve now coaches what he calls sensitive rebels. And it's the stories of the struggles and successes of sensitive rebels from around the world that he features in his podcast of the same name. Prior to becoming a psychotherapist, though, Steve worked in IT. Not quite the career journey he anticipated, as someone who entered college wanting to be a fiction writer, but having the backup plan of being a chemist. Now is it? I don't know about you guys, but this bio makes me so interested in talking to this guy. So let's dive in. Hi, Steve. How's it going?
It is going well, Jennie. How are you?
I am wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm excited to have you here. So I sort of start all of my interviews with the same question. Tell me what it was like for you growing up as an everything enthusiast. Was your family supportive?
So yeah, they were. My parents split up when I was fairly young, like 4.5. And so I really pretty much grew up with them separately, but I did have time with both parents. And so my mom was an artist that should have been, I'll say, very creative, a lot of creatives in the family. And she was always just kind of fine with whatever things I was into or interested in. And my father was really throughout not just my childhood, but as in my adulthood too. One of the things I definitely would have to give him credit for is he was a very good cheerleader. Pretty much whatever I was interested in, he was supportive of, encouraging of. He would sometimes even take an interest in it himself. So he kind of understood it. And so from that standpoint, I always felt like whatever I was kind of interested in or curious about, I certainly didn't have any resistance and often had some support or at least allowance to be like, sure, go for it.
That's nice. Yeah. Not everybody gets lucky like that. So that's a special thing because it's interesting to talk to people who grew up with coming up against that wall versus people who were like allowed to flourish. I wonder what your thoughts are on this, like how much of multi-potentiality is genetic?
I think it's a good question. I suspect like so many of these things, I think the answer is probably like some of it is, and some of it's environmental. And what happens is you get synergies where you get somebody who has a tendency that way, and then they're supported and it really takes hold. Or you get someone who is, one, but not the other. And there's maybe a conflict or what have you. And in my case, I think it's like, I'm not the most potentialite out there, but I definitely am somewhat. And then obviously was supported in doing so by my parents. And I try and do the same for my daughter because she's a very curious soul. And so I've tried to encourage and nurture that curiosity. And we'll see what things she ends up doing.
Yeah, that's huge. I think because it's tempting as a parent, I think when kids are like, but why, to be like, stop asking questions. But I've written articles myself that we need to nurture that, as annoying as much as that might drive you to need to drink wine early in the day. It is a valuable thing to just seek after whatever you're curious about, I think.
The thing it points out to me with my daughter, because the whys started when she was about 3 and they haven't stopped. And I've always encouraged it. I can't always answer them. And sometimes I'm like, I can't answer anymore today, but she is pretty much on a daily basis asking some question or other, wondering about something that highlights something that I don't know, that I'm like, why don't I know the answer to that? Or why did I never find out the answer? I'm like, I don't know. I'm curious. Let's see what Google has to say.
Yeah, I love, I mean, and that's an interesting thing too, is that it sort of drives you to be like, and then fall down the rabbit hole yourself, which can be a good and a bad thing,
Totally.
right?
Totally.
Yeah. So you are fascinating to me because of all of the everything enthusiasts that I have interviewed up to this point, they've fallen into one of two camps. There's so this is Barbara Scher's book back here, and she's the one that introduced this concept of cyclical multipotentialites who sort of revisit the same passions over and over again, and then sequential ones who like love and leave their interests. And when they leave it, they sort of never revisit that again. But you're both, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say there's definitely some of both in there. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the evolution of your various different loves. Like, which things have you gone back to? Which things do you know you'll never do again?
As a kid, it was like something would grab my attention. I'd be curious about it and I would go dig into it until I either ran out of stuff to like learn or know about it, or I got stuck. So there's a couple of examples, like with something like an activity like drawing, which I took up as a kid. I am not, I'll share, I'm not a naturally talented artist. And I certainly with things like, that require any kind of fine coordination or things like that was not a strength of mine. Got kind of stuck, frustrated, just kind of abandoned it. Came back to art later in different forms. So I would do that and quit. But like with like books, I'd find an author that I liked and I'm like, I'm going to read everything by them. And, then it would be like, well, there's nothing more to read. So I'd go on to some other thing. But when they had a new book, I'd, it would come out. But fairly early on, music was certainly a thing that showed up for me. And I've always, like some of my earlier memories from childhood is like me, in my room on weekends reading and like listening to music, which later became playing music, again, not very well. And the playing music is one that has been more of a cyclical. It's like I did it for a while, kind of went away because I was doing other things. And it's kind of come and gone a few times in my life. It's been more of a steady presence the last 7 years or so. But it's a thing that's come and gone. But what I found is some things, there's not necessarily its total rhyme or reason, but some things it's kind of like, it doesn't interest me anymore. Or I get stuck or something. And other ones, it just feels like it's like, I kind of go, well, I don't know, I kind of run out of energy with it for now, or life takes me away from it. Golf would be an example of that, a thing I did for a few years and I was really excited about it, really into it. And life got to a place where it just didn't really fit in. And then I got out of the habit, and it wasn't till a number of years later where a space emerged. Actually, this is a COVID, like one of the COVID gratitude things where it was like, I had suddenly had a space to be like, oh, actually I could go do this, not to mention my daughter being interested, and that got me back into it. So it's a number of different factors. And it's not really until more recently that I've even thought a whole lot about this. It's just kind of been for me a lot like just kind of following my interest, which for both the good and bad that goes with that, right? Because it's fun and it's interesting, but it leaves kind of a scattered trail of things along the way too.
Yeah, and we'll dig a little bit more into that. Your bio made me crack up, by the way, because I feel like it speaks to my heart. So a chemist, if fiction writer didn't work out, then an IT guy, then a psychotherapist, now a coach.
Right.
So you were supported by your family, which is great. But did you ever at any point along those lines struggle with feeling like something was wrong with you?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
with some frequency. I mean, I think, when I was young, so the whole chemist creative writing thing, neither one of those ever really took hold. That was that was my young idealistic high school self who was like, well, I'd love to be a writer. That seems really cool and exciting and whatever. But if that doesn't work, chemist will be the backup plan. That's more practical. And also, but I did really think chemistry was interesting in high school. One semester of college convinced me that neither of those things were going to be true. And that was like, oh my God, what now? And I was really lost at that point and really kind of like, I don't know, stumbled through college, managed to, to kind of at least get my stuff together enough to get a degree completed. And it was a few years before I, hit on IT as like, okay, maybe I could do this. I was kind of like computers, but, even along then, there was been plenty of self-doubt and uncertainty. I don't think it was until I really made the decision to say, okay, I'm going to become a psychotherapist. that was, I think, career-wise, one of the first points where I really had what I would call kind of a deep confidence about I'm going to do this and
Mhm.
it is a thing I'm supposed to do. And
Okay.
up until then, though, it was like, I don't know. There was a lot of
Yeah.
uncertainty along the way for sure.
Yeah, that's such a reflection of my own story because I like have always secretly or not so secretly now loved writing, wanted to be a writer, but I went into college as an environmental chemistry major. And college, like, 1 year, I was like, I don't want to do this. And then had no idea what next. So, I mean, it's so interesting how like we kind of mirror each other in that way. So, was it then deciding to be a psychotherapist? Like we talked in another conversation about like redefining success
Mhm.
for ourselves. Is that what did it for you? Or is there like another defining moment where you kind of did that for yourself?
I mean, I think that was one aspect of it, right? That was from the standpoint of really adopting a professional identity and saying, this is a way of being in the world, a way of contributing in the world that fits me, that I feel like I can really own. Like it's like you finally, it's like if you've been wearing clothes that don't fit well and you finally try on one that fits, you're like, yeah, it was very much like that.
Yeah.
So in that place, it was a very nice, just kind of stabilizing thing. And now I'm forgetting your question. I'm sorry. It's very
No, the like how what would be your advice for someone who's multi-passionate like us to in terms of redefining success? Because that I think is key.
yeah. So got me to a point of defining success from a like having a clear identity. Then there was, of course, what's success from the standpoint of executing on it, which for me was, can I start my own practice and get to a point where I'm actually making enough money to pay all my bills? Right. And so that was a definition of success for me. And it was really just that from a professional standpoint. From a personal standpoint, I think it's been more about getting to a place of learning to embrace and accept who I am and the nature of that. My interests come and go. They go in waves, they go in seasons, whatever you want to call it, because I had a really I had a difficult time with that for a long time. When I was a kid, it didn't bother me. As I got to be an adult, I heard some of the stories from people. I remember I had a couple of bosses who mentioned something to me about the whole like jack of all trades, master of none idea. And I just remember thinking like, oh, I don't stick with things. I'm not, da, 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 da. Ironic, of course, because at the same time, I can be one of the most stubborn, persistent people in the world. It's just about where it is. But it was a few years later where I really finally got to the point of understanding that's who I am. And I will be interested in this for a while and then it'll go away. Maybe it'll come back, maybe it won't. And so it became more about, not about, do I have this deep knowledge and skill in this, hobby, which is when I was younger, what I thought it was supposed to be, and more about like, am I engaging my time and energy in things that feel meaningful, valuable, and whatnot, right? Am I getting something out of the experience and allowing it to be more temporary, more ephemeral, more like, I'll do this for a while, more impermanent. And probably some of the reading I had done, around Buddhism and such helped with that concept
Mm.
of, things don't have to be that. But also, I think I grew up really seeking stability and predictability. And as I kind of went on my journey of life, I've gradually gotten to a point where I've been less needing of that and more able to be like, it's all good, I'm fine, and so able to just embrace that shifting that happens more than I could before, which is cool because it allows me to just have fun with something and know it'll be here for a while and it'll go away. And that's cool.
Yeah, it sounds like it was that self-acceptance piece for you. Like you just were like, this is who I am. This is how I show up in life. And was that, I mean, you say like Buddhism has a lot to do with that, but your self-development journey is maybe kind of what got you to that point.
There, yeah, and some of the study of Buddhism is certainly a piece of that.
Mm.
My own personal therapy work is a piece of it. A lot of the things I've read, I think there's a lot of pieces along the way. One of the ones that was, a little bit later in the journey, but very fundamental one was my work around going through Kristen Neff's book on self-compassion.
Mm.
Because I'd always had a very, I'll say kind of harsh, internal critical parent, and was ironic because neither of my parents were like that at all. Right. I mean, although the whole thing was more about an absence of parenting. And so I internalized this really kind of critical, rigid harsh parent. And it was about really coming to terms with how mean I was to myself and recognizing that, well-intentioned though that might have been, all it did was hold me down
Mm-hmm.
and not allow me to be a human. And
Mm-hmm.
when I really got some work done under that, it was a lot more easy to just to kind of be and to recognize that, like, it's okay. I'm okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so many of us have that inner critic who's just like such a mean girl. It's a good question to ask. Like, would you ever say something like that to someone you cared about?
Yep.
Because like until someone asked me that question, I was like, whoa, I am really harsh with myself. So yeah, that's so important, I think, for my audience to hear if they still have that self-talk, that self-acceptance piece is crucial to making the best of this life, for sure. Go
It
ahead.
is. Yeah, I think it's also challenging because so many of the norms in our world about how we're supposed to be don't line up with being a multi-passionate, right?
Exactly.
And
Yes.
so you're the messaging you're kind of picking up just around you is not in line with that's okay. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you don't have a really good, strong internal self and have done the self-acceptance work, you're really going to have a challenge there. And that is, I think, a place where a lot of folks get tripped up. One, as it relates to this topic, but I think in any way in which someone falls outside of the box of, I'll use the word the norm rather than normal, but just to say what is typical or what's expected. And Susan Cain did such a good job of bringing this to light as it relates to introversion with her book Quiet, where we see how society really favors extroversion.
Mm-hmm.
And there's in that, but certainly with multi-passionates, I think it's very true. So you've got to find that internally and find other people who are like that or who will support that, because we all need that reinforcement, because the world is not going to encourage you to do it. The world's going to be like, you should be specializing when you're 2 years old.
Yeah, the message that I feel like we all, even if we were supported by our parents, as I was, like I still got those messages. So I agree.
Sure. Because like starting in high school, it's like, what are you going to do when you grow up? What are you going to do? What are you going to study in college? What are you going to major in?
Yeah.
What are you going to? It's like, yeah, it feels like this thing you have to figure out. And if you don't know, if you're like, what if I want to do? I mean, even the chemistry creative writing thing, people were like, what?
Yeah.
Because it was like these two weird divergent things. And it was like, even that, it's like, why aren't you picking one? It's like, I don't know. They're both cool. I don't know which one will work out.
It makes me laugh that for the longest time I received the advice that I had to put one thing on my business card. Otherwise, I would confuse people.
Mm-hmm.
And I took it to heart, but like, who cares? Like, what an odd reason to put myself in a box so that I don't confuse anyone else. God forbid I confuse them. But that is chemistry and creative writing are confused. How can you be both of those things?
Right.
So have you heard? We may have talked about this the last time, but I can't remember now. The second half of Jack of all trades, master of none.
I think I have, but I don't remember it. I think I remember hearing this once, but go ahead.
Yeah. So I just posted this on Instagram and everybody went crazy because no one has ever heard this. The full phrase is a jack of all trades is a master of none, but oftentimes better than a master of one.
Oh, okay.
So it was originally intended to be a compliment. I feel like it was a diabolical plot put in place by God knows who to keep us all like, smushed down so that we wouldn't like reach our fullest potential. Because what an odd thing to just stop it in the middle of the sentence there and then be like, see, you're broken because you're not a master of anything. Isn't that interesting?
It is, yeah. And
Yeah.
they don't get enough attention, but there's plenty of examples of people and known people in the world who have multiple interests. You often hear more about one than the other, but there's plenty of people who've done that. It's certainly a possible thing if one has won the interest and is willing to dedicate the time. And I think there's a lot of useful cross-pollination that can come from
Course.
multiple interests, right? And this is one of the things that David Epstein talks about in his book Range, is how early specialization can be problematic, whereas the early diversity of experiences leads to often insights and creative things. And how many like innovations have been, let's take this thing from this world and this thing from this world and let's mix them together, which is not something someone who's super narrowly focused is going to think to do.
Absolutely. I mean, I just think that Leonardo da Vinci is sort of like such a great example of he was multi-passionate. I mean, that's like what the Renaissance was sort of an appreciation of people who were explored a bunch of different things, but we've sort of shifted away from that over time. But I agree, like that ability to cross-pollinate and connect dots that maybe other people couldn't connect is what makes us so unique and special.
For sure.
Yeah. So you write, I find I do best with a mix of structure and variability.
Mm-hmm.
And I read that and I was like, I don't get that. And then I was like, no, maybe I totally get that. Maybe that's what I'm doing already. But I would love it if you would explain that.
Well, sure. I have evolved from doing psychotherapy to doing coaching. There's still a lot of things that are fundamentally similar or the same about the work, right? I'm working with individuals, helping them to have more self-awareness, to be more able to follow their journeys, to be more impactful in the world. But so I've been doing this similar sort of work for quite a long time now, like almost 20 years. When I look at it, it's like, wow, what the heck happened? But, and it doesn't get boring. And people are like, well, what's up with that? And I appreciate certain aspects of it. I appreciate the fact that it's like, okay, I have these scheduled meetings and they have a contained box of time. I jokingly used to talk about my schedule as 50-minute boxes of chaos, by which I meant, so I have these 50-minute sessions that are a box. I don't know what's going to happen in them. And chaos isn't really the right word. That has kind of some associations with it. It's more like a 15-minute box of mystery, maybe. And that was cool because I knew there was this container, but I didn't know what was going to be in it. And so again, it was that mix of that. And I realized at some point, it gave me enough predictability, enough consistency that comforted part of me, but it also gave enough nuance, enough novelty to also speak to me. And there are certain other things like that. It's like, I think it's part of why, like with any of us, maybe with say something like reading fiction or certain genres, and why we like certain formats or formulas. So like mystery novels, just as an example, there's a certain set of things that's how it's kind of supposed to go and happen. And we like that there's that piece, but also the fact that each story has its own uniqueness. Or for me, like say with art, when I'm doing painting, I use a pretty limited color palette. And that's in part because my knowledge of color theory is not very good. But in part, it's also because I like those colors. And by creating that sort of structure, that consistency, I don't have to worry about that. And I can focus the creativity in another place. And so it's just one of those things I've learned. It's like something that's a balance of the two provides a pretty sustainable interest. And so from a career standpoint, that's been super useful because I've been able to just, follow a career path that both actually is a path that I can progress along, but doesn't get boring.
Yeah, it to me, I think of like, I've talked to a lot of people who say that without structure, creativity can't work as well because, and I used to believe that being an artist meant just these like totally free form days. You wake up and you do whatever, wherever you go, where the wind takes you. And that doesn't work. That doesn't allow you to actually move the needle on any projects. And I think you can sometimes be more creative inside the space. I mean, I hate to say inside of a box because we're so all about being outside of the box, but in a way that makes you more effective.
It does, because what it does is it allows your energy and attention to be more concentrated, I think, and that gives it greater power, greater energy, greater ability to be expressed, right? So if you're say, like, I'll just use the art example. If I'm not spending energy going, God, what color should I use? How should I combine colors? Right. I can be focused more on, okay, what do I want to do from a shape contrast, from a, design contrast. And so it allows me to put more energy into that, which leads, I think, to a greater likelihood of something coming out that's creative or interesting or powerful. Right. And so I think there is a little bit of a balance there of finding what's the right level of constraint or limitation that supports the energy being focused versus just kind of, create something.
Which sounds so daunting, right?
Because especially if you have a creative associative brain, your brain immediately comes up with like 50 different things you could do. And all its energy gets expended in generating ideas, which is fun and interesting as a brainstorming exercise. But, you end up burning a lot of energy there versus here, I'm going to give you these 3 items, create something with it, or
Hmm.
whatever. I assume the green eggs and ham story.
What do you, I mean, yes, I'm familiar with the
Well,
story.
but sorry, but about the story about the bet that led to it being written.
No, I do
Oh,
not. Oh my
okay.
gosh, tell
So,
me.
okay. So, basically his editor, Dr. Seuss's editor, made a bet with him and was like, I bet you cannot write a book using only no more than 50 separate words. You can repeat the words, but only 50 unique words. And he was like, yeah, I can. And that's what led to him writing Green Eggs and Ham. That book is the product of a bet and a constraint. And it's only one of the most popular children's books ever. So
That is super cool. I had no idea. I'm a huge Dr. Seuss fan, and UC San Diego, the library is named the Geisel Library. It was dedicated to him by his wife. The entire bottom floor has all of his original art
oh,
like
cool. I love
on
it.
display. Yeah, it's amazing. So I love hearing that. That is, and it just, I have to almost remind myself because it seems so counterintuitive that limiting things actually expands your creativity.
Mhm.
So it's nice to have these conversations where I'm like, yeah, I need to maybe give myself some more challenges in that regard. I think that could be fun.
And
Yeah.
there are musicians who've made entire careers out of playing and recording music in pretty much one musical key. But they're
Yeah.
so good and they know it so well that they're able to innovate or create in it in ways that no one else would do without spending so much time there. Right. Because
Mm-hmm.
and this is where where focus, which does certainly have its place, becomes powerful. And so I think with so much of this, like, it's always about balance in my mind anyway. And some of this is about balancing the right mix of, putting your energy into creativity, but in certain focused ways, but where that focus can be set up across. I'm not going to articulate this very well. It can go a lot of different ways. I guess I'll just say we need to think more broadly about what we mean by focus.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh, definitely. I mean, I agree with you in that sense. I have to ask you, you talk about turning moods into art.
yeah.
And that's another thing that my brain kind of went, huh? Like you're such a good bio writer because you've sent me like 3 different versions of a bio, and every single one of them, I was like, if I didn't already know him, I would need to get to know him because of that sentence. So tell me about turning
Well,
moods into art. What does that
sure.
mean to you?
Well, what that means is that what I create is not representational art; it is abstract art, right?
Okay.
It is so, and really the purpose of it is to either express feeling, generate feeling, evoke feeling, and so that's the idea. And the same thing for me from a music standpoint. And part of why music is such an important thing to me, which I didn't understand at first, but came to learn later, is because music for me really has a very strong emotional effect on me. And so it is a way, both through listening to it, I can help to manage or moderate my moods, but also through creating it, I can help to express different moods. And that's really what I'm often thinking of. So I'm not thinking people use maybe say art or, painting to share a picture or to tell a story. And certainly music, like a song in essence, right, is a story. And I'm often thinking of those things, at least in my creation of it. And a lot of the stuff I appreciate is more about one that's expression of a mood or a feeling, or it could be a combination of feelings. Right. But that's kind of, what I mean in the way I came up with explaining what's going on there and why it's not, it's not representational. It's more a feeling kind of thing. There may be elements of it, like some of my art has motifs in some of the design elements that have musical association, things like sine waves and things that would be taken from sound, but it's really, again, it's not representational art, it's abstract. So
Interesting. And so you use the art that you do and the music. I mean, and you say that, you're not great at these things. So are they, you use them to like help you deal with emotions and stuff, right?
yeah, they're, especially the music, it is a hobby, it is for fun, it is for me. I mean, I'll let my family listen and I, whatever, but I don't perform, and I probably never never will. Because it is for fun, but I find it a really super useful way for me to help process feelings that otherwise would not get. If I'm feeling agitated or distressed or often any way, or even kind of heavy, it seems to be a way for me to let go of that. Music's really powerful for that. Art can be too. That was actually one of the ways in which I first came to painting, was as a thing that ended up being a kind of a part of what I did to help myself recover, frankly, from an episode of major depression. I'd done a lot of therapy, which was very helpful, and was on medication for a while. But then I had the experience of kind of re-encountering Jackson Pollock's art. And at that particular point, seeing it from the context of someone who is depressed and kind of in recovery from that and thinking about things, I had this awareness of like, hey, there's a reason that's not a thing, because it actually in a sense is a thing. It's like, I think that's the noise in his head, because he's someone who really, really struggled with mental illness actually. And it was like, oh, that's an interesting thought. And so that got me thinking, oh, well, what would happen if I tried to play with some of that? Right. So I did some experimentation with art of that style, and was really like, it was one of those things where it was like, oh, this is cool. And, part of my brain really locked onto it. And for like 4 to 6 months, I did quite a bit of it. And then one day it was just done. It was one of those, it went away and it didn't come back for over a decade, because it was like whatever I needed to process was gone. I don't know. But I really found that doing that, was there. And I noticed that it will change depending on what's going on for me too. Like there is a way in which it will look a little bit different or have a different feel. So it's like, okay, there's something getting expressed here. I won't pretend to fully understand it. And again, my art knowledge and skills as far as techniques are fairly basic. I'm I shouldn't teach anyone anything. I know basic rudimentary stuff. I've learned certain things to be able to create what I'm trying to create. And, so that's what I mean. I'm like, my partner is a professional artist. And so she can do amazing stuff and knows all these little fine details. She makes her own paint and stuff. So I'm nothing compared to that. But at the same time, people like it. I have actually sold art. So, it's obviously something that does speak to some people. And I have shared that more publicly, because there's some of it I am relatively proud of. We have some of it on the wall, and some of it I'm like, all right, I made that. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's interesting to think of. I mean, I wonder how many people use a form of art to exercise their demons, so to speak, because I'm currently working on a novel that is me giving myself closure about a situation that I wouldn't otherwise get closure about. And it's so funny because like, obviously I'm doing a million different things. And so I'm writing the novel very, very slowly. And I had this like flash of insight the other day. I was like, I got to write this thing because I'm going to go crazy if I don't, So it feels like you're saying a lot of the same thing in terms of how all of a sudden one day it was done for you. Cause like the demon was gone.
whatever was in there that I needed to get out was apparently gone and done, and it was fine. And, when it came back, it was more about understanding that this is a useful tool. It's helped me before, and I'm in a space now where I can use it almost more. Then it was more like I had this problem I needed to solve. And then more ongoing, it's more of kind of a maintenance mode of it's just kind of a thing to help kind of tune, keep things a little bit tuned or to play with. And it's been different in that sense. It doesn't feel as like compulsive as it did at that time. It really felt like this thing of like, I had to do, but also we know this, I mean, emotion, right? The emotion and feelings, the part of the brain that comes from is not the same part of the brain where language comes from. And the idea that language can adequately cover all the different things that we can feel or experience, I think is not entirely realistic. And so things like art and music, I think sometimes are able to convey something in a way that's better than language would be able to. Certainly the English language, I've talked about this before, a lot of other languages have these really cool words that express these nuanced concepts. I'm like, why doesn't English have cool words like that?
I know. We've taken so many words from everywhere else, and yet we're still lacking in that way. But yeah, that's a great point. I think that it's so limiting in terms of concepts. That's why I think abstract art is so fascinating, because it's this like the sky's the limit for what you perceive out of picture that you're looking at. Do you have a creative studio dedicated for doing this stuff?
We have in our house, and we were really fortunate to find and be able to get this house. So our house was built in the 50s, but it has this little, it's like not little, but this nice loft area upstairs. And that is part of why we got this house. We're like, that's a perfect place to use for our studio. We used to have a house that had this one bedroom that we had dedicated, but it was really poorly shaped. And so probably 60% of it is dedicated to my partner because it's, she's running her art business out of it. And so that's like her professional space. And then the other half is for like me and my daughter. And so that's where like I've got, some of my music gear and where we've got some tables and our various arts and crafts and whatever stuff. But that whole space upstairs is like, yeah, exactly. It's like, this is creative land, fun, creative things happen here. And it's totally cool. And it's just like this very, very cool, neat space. And there's like people know it's like, that's where the creativity lies. Cause I've got some guitars hanging on the wall in the stairway as you go up to it. And so people can see it's like, basically it's almost like having the sign, the creativity this way.
Yeah. You're entering Wonderland now.
Right.
I love that. That is what I aspire to. Like, I just want a dedicated room. I went into a friend's artist studio one day and I was just like, can I just live here?
Yeah, it's a cool and fun. It's a fun space. There's no lack of people who come visit our house who haven't been in there before. Like because there's so much different stuff you can do and poke around with, whatever, which is kind of by design. But it's a nice space to have. We're really happy to have it there and fortunate.
Yeah, definitely. Is it tidy or does it look? I would imagine it would be like.
It varies. Again, my partner, she's really good at keeping her stuff pretty organized and tidy because she really needs to because of all the different things. So it kind of comes and goes.
I mean, Picasso was not tidy.
Right. What I'll say is it depends. Like if I'm in the middle of like doing painting or stuff, it gets kind of crazy and chaotic. But we found, and this was her super smart idea. We found these Ikea countertops that are designed to be used in like kitchens. And I don't know whatever they're covered, like the coating on them is, but it's pretty much impervious to anything and you can clean it. So no matter what you get on it, like it's fine. And so for me with my paint, I'll be painting and stuff and there'll be paint all over it. It looks, like somebody basically like blew up a paint store on the table, but it all comes off like between magic erasers and other stuff. And so,
cool.
it's kind of like entropy. It kind of gets gradually chaotic and messy and whatever. And it's like, okay.
Sure. Sure. How interesting that it can be a little bit of both depending on the day.
Oh yeah, it totally depends on the day and when you look at it, when you catch it, what you're going to find up there, who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to circle back for a second to, we were talking about making connections and how, I just think that we're so incredibly gifted at that. You cited as an example of how fascinated you are by this topic, the fact that the way credit scores work is almost identical to how you should approach trust in a relationship. And I am dying to have you elaborate on that.
Sure. So one, this is a thing that it kind of like popped into my head. And again, I have no idea why, it did one day, but I was trying to think about it. It really comes down to like one of the things with my work, right, is I understand and learn a lot of different concepts about psychology and about the brain and all this stuff. And some of it's a little bit more complex than most people are actually interested in learning on that level, right? Not everyone wants to have that depth of knowledge, but they want to understand the concept. And so I'm always trying to think, how can I convey this idea in a way that will be accessible to that person? And certainly trust is such a big and important thing when it comes to relationships, and relationships are fundamental to my work, whether it's personal or business or whatever, right? Because relationships go into both places, and everyone's had the experience of being burned. Everyone's had the experience of that. And it's painful. And a lot of the folks I work with are people who tend towards over trusting. And so they have sometimes been burned a lot. And they're like, and they tend to then sometimes flip to the like, oh, I'm not going to trust anyone. Like, well, how do I know? How do I know if somebody's safe? And so credit to Brene Brown here, because a lot of this is taken from her concepts of vulnerability and how we need to approach vulnerability and, and all of that in a more gradual way. It's not, it is on or off. It's about, do people earned your trust or not? Or she's got a story about the idea of the marble jar and how she got that from her daughter, or I don't remember, but anyway, it connects to her daughter, but there's a story about that. But I was like, okay, thinking of it in this gradual thing, I'm like, what other thing increases or decreases or changes based on, your transactions and your interactions? And I'm like, oh, wait, actually, this seems a lot like your credit score, because like, if you initially like, okay, Citibank is the example I always give, not trying to give them a plug, but like, I go to college, when you're first in college, like they'll give a credit card to any college student, like with a $500 limit. Doesn't matter. You've got a pulse. You can sign your name here, $500. Because to them, that's not a lot to extend. It's a very little level. And if you show that you will be responsible with that, not misuse it, but use it properly, they'll give you more and more and more and more. I still have the credit card I first got in college, right? And
Yeah.
it's more than a $500 limit now because I've shown I'm trustworthy. But at the same time, if you misuse it or abuse it, they'll knock your credit limit down or close your card.
Yeah.
The same way in a relationship, the degree of vulnerability you should be giving to somebody depends on what they have done with the previous vulnerability you've given them. You share something personal, private, vulnerable. Are they respectful of it? Are they empathetic? Are they compassionate? Or do they, use it as a weapon against you? Right. Or whatever. Or are they dismissive of it? Well, you think about those experiences and that gives you a sense of, okay, maybe this person is safe to go further with. And through letting that evolve over time, rather than treating it as this person's trustworthy, this person's not,
Mm-hmm.
does is it allows us to, one, let our relationships evolve, but also it allows us to have a process of building trust and building connection that's gradual. And so we can, end up with basically a range of
Yeah.
relationships, right? Some are a lot deeper and more connected. Some are pretty shallow, and a lot are somewhere in between.
That's such a great way of illustrating it because it makes me immediately realize that I would be a terrible credit card company, first of all. I would get everybody all the credit and then I would get so screwed. So I really like that because it's an evolution and that's how it should be. And they don't teach you that stuff in school. And I kind of wish that somebody had because I would have saved myself a lot of hurt.
There's a lot of things they don't teach us in school that would be good to know, but yeah, and that's definitely one of them, right? How to assess and navigate trust and all that, because it's such an important thing. Again, talk about managing energy, because if you have the relationships you can trust, you don't have to worry so much about boundaries or about protecting yourself or about filtering what
Sure.
you say. So those are really, in a lot of ways, lower energy relationships to manage, because you're not having to deal with armor,
Yeah.
someone else where it's like, well, they're okay here or not okay here, so the more we know and understand those nuances, the better we can navigate our relationships safely, or just identify certain ones where it's like, no, that's probably not someone I want to have in my circle.
Yeah. And that's just a really good way to make it understandable, I think, in different terms that just make kind of click. I like it.
Right. And this is a place as an example of where I think people who are multi-passionate can be really powerful, because
Mm.
they can take, wait, this thing and this thing from totally random places that they have been, and they can connect the dots, right? And they can do that. And that allows them to make things relatable to people, to explain things and all of that, right? And like I said before, it leads to innovation, because there's plenty of things that are innovative products where it's like, what if we take this idea from this world and we place it over in this world and apply that concept to this thing? It's like, oh, look at that.
Yeah, we're so necessary. I'm so glad that it's sort of starting to catch on that, the best think tank would be a mix of specialists
Mhm.
and multi-passionate people, like linear thinkers and non-linear thinkers. They're going to come up collectively with the, world-changing innovations. I really believe that.
Once again, it turns out that diversity is a valuable thing, huh?
Imagine. Crazy, right? So I want to wrap things up by asking if you could give your younger self one piece of advice. What do you think that would be?
Does it have to be one? There's so many things I'd like to tell.
No, it doesn't.
Um,
Top three, whatever.
we'll see. I think as it relates to this topic, I think there's a couple of things. One, I would tell him that just because you get stuck and aren't good at something immediately doesn't mean you can't or won't be good at it, and that you should quit. That's one, because there's a lot of stuff I quit or gave up on or abandoned too soon or at all, that who knows what could have happened with that. A lot of missed possibility there. That's a thing I would love for him to know. I think, another is to listen to yourself more, for
Yeah.
sure. And another would be slow the heck down. You don't
Yeah.
a fire. Like, in retrospect, I'm like, God, I would have done really well to not go straight to college. Although at the time I thought I knew what I wanted to do. And so it was like, I had what I thought was a pretty clear idea, but it wasn't. So that's an easy one to do with hindsight. But I think there have been times where I've been so focused on trying to get somewhere, right, rather than enjoying the journey and enjoying the process, that it's not only made the journey not so much fun, but it's actually led to going down a lot of wrong paths.
Yeah, that's why I like this question so much, because if there's anyone who's on the younger side listening who can maybe, avoid some of those wrong paths. And I mean, it's fine to change your mind. I'm also trying to normalize quitting and changing your mind if you truly aren't inspired by a thing anymore. That's another thing we have to give ourselves permission for,
Yes, and that's a listening to yourself thing also.
Yeah.
Right? Because I've made mistakes both ways. There's plenty of things I've quit too soon, but there's also things I didn't quit when I should have.
Mm-hmm.
And in a
Yeah.
lot of those cases, it's about not listening to, not trusting yourself, and not really just not understanding how some of this stuff works. Again, because what you're being taught in school is, other things. And if you don't have someone in your world teaching or showing you this stuff, it's really easy to get to adulthood without having picked some of it up, which is a bummer.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That's why these conversations are so valuable, I think. So tell me, Steve, where can my audience find you if they want to learn more about you?
Sure. So right now, at the moment, my online presence is a little bit of a mess. But if you go to Instagram and you look for The Sensitive Rebel, you will find my podcast Instagram. And so that's where you'll get links to podcast episodes. You will also see, I think there's some links to some videos that I've done there. Otherwise, stevemccready.com is always a good place to be there. My website is about to get something of a refresh because it's a little bit dated, but you can always get me there and connect to me via email. That way, steve@stevemccready.com. I'm on LinkedIn too, although I don't do a whole lot there, but probably Instagram is the best place if you want to find me and kind of get a sense of what's going on. And yeah, The Sensitive Rebel is the right one there. If you want to see some of my artwork as well as some pizza, it's a whole other random interest. You can you can go to if you look for Limbic LIMBIC Visions, all one word, on Instagram. That is where, when I was doing art more actively, I posted a lot of it there. So that's a place people can find that if they're curious about it.
For those of you listening, his podcast is amazing. He's a great interviewer, and the conversations you have with people are just beautiful. I told you already, Steve, I was walking around my complex, tears streaming down my face. Inexplicably, I'm like, what is happening to me right now? But I was just so moved by just one of your episodes. So keep doing the good work that you're doing. And thank you so much for sharing your time with me today. This was absolutely amazing, and I appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. No, happy to be on. Thanks for having me on. And thanks for doing the work you're doing. So this is it's an important thing. There's a real value in folks who have multiple interests, multiple passions, and are bringing those to the world on a lot of ways. And I think that, like you said, ideally we need specialists, but we also need people who have really diverse interests. And but I think there's not enough of these voices out there. And so I think it's great that you are putting your voice out there and sharing stories of others, because I think it will help people. I mean, it's part of why I do my podcast, right? It's the same thing, to help other people who feel lost or alone, or there aren't others like them, or feel like they're not normal.
Yeah.
To show no, you're not alone. This is a thing, and there's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah, that's the bottom line, is there is nothing wrong with you. And knowing that other people can do all of the things and live their best life, I think is such an inspiring message, because I was like, how can I be the first person in all of history who does all the things and actually is going to make something out of myself? It can be done. And I just really like that message. So
Totally.
yeah. Yeah. Well, this was fantastic. Thank you so much. And I will speak to you again really soon, Steve.
Awesome. Thank you, Jennie.
All right. Take care.
You too.
Thank you guys so much for listening to today's episode. If you found this content valuable enough to warrant a tip, you can show your appreciation by visiting buymeacoffee.com/Jennie O'Connor. Or you can support the show by rating and reviewing, which I would love so much if you would do, or by coming to hang out with me on the socials at Your Creative Fairy Godmother. My goal is to help creative people like you step into the spotlight and make real money from their art. I've created a ton of free resources to help you out with this. And one of those is my habit tracking spreadsheet, which will help you gamify your healthy habits so you can compete against yourself each week for prizes. Sounds fun, right? You can find that at jennieoconnor.com/habit tracker. And while you're there, go sign up to be notified the next time the Multipassionate Master Plan goes live. Until next time, I love you guys so much and want to remind you that you are the artist of your own life. Now get on out there and do the thing.